In the summer of 1942, in the coastal town of Pascagoula, Mississippi, something strange began to happen. The country was deep in World War II. Blackout curtains covered windows. Soldiers passed through on their way to war. The world outside was chaotic. But what unfolded in Pascagoula was something no one could explain. Someone or something was sneaking into homes in the middle of the night. Not to steal, not to hurt, not to kill, but to cut hair. This is the story of the Phantom Barber, a mystery that has remained unsolved for over 80 years. It started quietly. On Monday, June 8, 1942, a young girl living near the US Army base awoke to find her hair had been cut while she slept. She had heard nothing. Her windows were locked. Her parents were nearby. There was no forced entry. No one saw anything. At first, it seemed like a prank, or maybe a sleepwalking incident. But then it happened again, and again. Just 2 days later, on June 10th, 2 more girls, twins, reported the same thing. They had gone to bed with long braids. They wore up with jagged, uneven hair, and strands scattered across their pillows. Now people were scared. Who would sneak into a house just to cut someone's hair? The newspapers gave the intruder a name, the Phantom Barber, and that's when the panic began. Soon local police were overwhelmed with calls. Citizens installed new locks. Husbands stayed up with shotguns. Parents stood guard outside children's bedrooms. And still the barber came. Silent, unseen. No one ever heard a door creak or a window slide open. He left behind only hair and fear. But then the mystery turned darker. On June 13th, just days after the hair-cutting incidents, Mr. and Mrs. Heidelberg, a prominent couple in town, were attacked in their bedroom by a man who entered through a slit in the window screen. He didn't take anything. He didn't say a word. He beat them both with a metal bar, nearly killing Mrs. Heidelberg. The couple survived, but the fear in Pascagoula deepened. Was this the work of the Phantom Barber? Had he escalated? The local sheriff, J. Guy Krebs, was under immense pressure to catch someone, anyone. He focused on a man named William Dolan, a 57-year-old chemist and German expatriate who had once expressed political views that raised suspicion during wartime. Dolan was arrested in August 1942, but not for the haircuts. Instead, he was accused of the assault on the Heidelbergs, based largely on circumstantial evidence, including a bar found near his property and a set of allegedly planted human hairs. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but even after his arrest, the Phantom-style haircuttings continued, which raised the question, did they get the wrong man? Some believe the whole thing was wartime paranoia. No money was ever stolen. No one was ever killed. Only hair, always from young girls, often from bedrooms near the military base. Theories spread quickly. Was it a disturbed barber? A fetishist? A military experiment gone wrong? Someone with a mental illness? Someone compelled to cut hair but too afraid to do more? No one could agree. Journalists came from out of state. The FBI even monitored the case, but eventually, as with many strange things, the story faded. William Dolan served 6 years before being quietly released and pardoned. Even the governor who signed the pardon admitted that the case was weak. Dolan maintained his innocence until his death. The hair-cutting incidents slowly stopped. No one was ever caught, and the Phantom Barber was never identified. Today, the case remains unsolved. The original police files are yellowed and incomplete. The homes where it happened are mostly gone, but the legend still lingers, because there's something deeply unsettling about the idea of a stranger entering your home, not to rob you or hurt you, but to take a piece of you, quietly, without a sound, while you sleep. The Phantom Barber didn't leave fingerprints. He didn't speak. He didn't write letters or make demands. Just hair, on the floor, on the pillow, sometimes braided, sometimes severed clean. To this day, no one knows why. Was it a compulsion, a warning, or something no one has yet imagined? In the dark corners of America's strangest history, the Phantom Barber sits quietly, half urban legend, half real case file. And maybe he's still out there, older now, retired, or watching, remembering the nights he crept through unlocked windows and the strange silence of a town that never caught him. In the summer of 1942, just months after the United States entered World War II, something deeply strange happened over the skies of California. It wasn't a battle, it wasn't sabotage, it wasn't even particularly violent, but it was a disappearance, a vanishing so quiet, so baffling that even now, more than 80 years later, no one can quite explain what happened. This is the story of the Ghost Blimp. It was August 16, 1942. The Navy L-8 blimp took off from Treasure Island in the San Francisco Bay at around 6 a.m. It was part of the U.S. Navy's Airship Patrol, Squadron 32. These small, helium-filled blimps were used for coastal surveillance, searching for Japanese submarines and mines along the American west coast. The L-8 had been doing these routine patrols for months, and the mission that morning was meant to be simple. Take off, scan the waters between San Francisco and the Farallon Islands, and return in a few hours. On board were two crewmen, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Adams. Both were experienced, both knew the aircraft well. There were no signs of trouble, the weather was good, the blimp was well maintained. They carried the usual equipment, life jackets, radios, emergency supplies, and even a small depth charge in case they spotted a submarine. At 7:42 a.m. the crew radioed that they were investigating a possible oil slick on the water, a telltale sign that a submarine might be nearby. After that, silence. There were no further messages, no reports of engine trouble, no calls for help. An hour passed, then another. At 11:15 a.m., residents of Daly City, a suburb just south of San Francisco, looked up to see the L-8 drifting inland. It was far off course, flying low and slow. Something seemed wrong. It finally came down in the middle of town. The blimp grazed power lines, crashed onto the roof of a house, and finally slumped into the street. Firefighters rushed to the scene, expecting to rescue injured crewmen. But when they opened the cabin door, they found something they weren't prepared for. The blimp was empty. Both crewmen were gone. Their parachutes were still inside. Their life vests were there. The radio was working. The depth charge was still intact. There were no signs of damage or a struggle. The cabin door wasn't locked, but it also wasn't wide open. It was simply unlatched, hanging ajar. It was as if the men had vanished into thin air. The Navy launched an immediate investigation. The L-8's engines were inspected and found to be in working order. The flight path was reconstructed. Witnesses had seen the blimp descend near the ocean, then rise again without signs of distress. A few fishermen even claimed they had seen two men inside earlier that morning. But at some point, after that last radio message, both crewmen disappeared without a trace. No bodies were ever recovered, no wreckage, no signs of foul play. So theories range from the simple to the bizarre. The official explanation was accidental fall. Some speculated that one man may have stepped out to inspect the exterior while the other tried to assist, and both fell overboard. But this doesn't fully add up. The blimp's cabin was small, and stepping out during flight would have been incredibly dangerous. Standard procedure would have required one man to remain at the controls at all times, and if one had fallen, surely the other would have radioed for help, or at least tried to bring the blimp down. Others suggested equipment failure, or even sudden turbulence, but again, the weather was calm, the controls worked, the engines were fine. The blimp had simply drifted until it ran out of fuel and crash-landed. And yet no trace of the men was ever found in the waters below, despite extensive Navy search efforts. Then came the stranger ideas. Desertion. Perhaps the men had planned to jump and disappear, but that too makes little sense. They left behind all personal effects. They were in uniform, and what motive would they have? Both were respected officers with no record of misconduct. Some whispered about abduction, that a Japanese submarine had surfaced and captured them, or that espionage was involved. But there were no enemy subs reported in the area that day, and no evidence of foreign involvement ever surfaced. Still others suggested the supernatural, that the blimp lived up to its nickname after the fact, that it had become, quite literally, a ghost ship, a vessel carrying no one, a mystery drifting silently above a city, its crew gone without a sound. Whatever the truth, the L-8 returned to service just days later. It was repaired, refilled, and flown again. Eventually repurposed for advertising as the Goodyear blimp after the war, it carried passengers across the skies for years. But for those who knew the story, flying in the L8 was never quite the same. They knew it had once returned home alone. As time passed, the story faded from headlines, but it never faded entirely, because it was too strange, too quiet, too unresolved. Two men boarded that blimp on a calm morning. They flew out over the Pacific. They made one radio call, and then they were gone. No one heard them scream. No one saw them jump. No one ever found them. Just an empty gondola, a working radio, and a silent descent over Daly City. In the end, the Ghost Blimp remains one of the most enduring aviation mysteries of the 20th century. A reminder that sometimes, even in an age of radar and radio, people can disappear without a trace. And that the sky, like the sea, still holds its secrets. In the hushed corridors of the National Library of Sweden sits a book unlike any other. It is nearly a meter tall, bound in heavy leather, and weighs over 160 pounds. When opened, its pages stretch wide across the table, thick with ancient ink and centuries of silence. It is called the Codex Gigas, Latin for giant book, but most people know it by another name, the Devil's Bible. And once you learn what's inside, you may understand why. The Codex Gigas was created in the early 13th century in the Kingdom of Bohemia, what is now the Czech Republic. Historians believe it was compiled by a Benedictine monk in the Podlazice monastery sometime around the year 1229. It contains nearly everything a medieval scholar could want: the complete Latin Bible, both Old and New Testaments, ancient medical texts, chronicles of Bohemian history, magical formulas, curses, and even a list of exorcisms. But none of these are what gave the Codex its sinister nickname. What truly sets this manuscript apart is page 290. On that page, occupying an entire leaf of parchment, is a full-page portrait of the devil. Not a symbolic sketch, not a casual reference. A massive image showing a horned, red-eyed creature crouching in isolation against a backdrop of darkness. Its claws are extended. Its tongue sticks out, taunting. It stares directly at the reader, and it is drawn with a level of detail and intensity unseen in any other medieval manuscript. On the opposite page, a heavenly city depicted in light, perfection, and symmetry. It's a visual contrast, good and evil, salvation and damnation, side by side, separated only by a spine. But why would a monk, a man of God, include such a disturbing image in a holy book? That's where the legend begins. According to medieval folklore, the Codex Gigas was not created by human hands alone. The story goes like this. A monk at the Podlazice monastery committed a terrible sin, one so severe that he was sentenced to be walled alive inside his cell as punishment. But instead of accepting his fate, he begged for mercy. He made a bold promise that he would create a book so magnificent, so complete, that it would glorify the monastery forever. And he would do it in a single night. The monks agreed. He began to write. But as midnight approached, the monk realized the task was impossible. No man could write such a vast tome in one night. And so he made a pact. He called out, not to God, but to Lucifer himself, the fallen angel, and asked for help. In exchange for his soul, the devil answered, and by morning the book was complete, perfect, flawless. And in the center of it, a portrait of the devil himself, drawn as a signature. Is the legend true? Always not in the literal sense. No signs of fatigue, no corrections, no changes in penmanship. Experts estimate it would have taken at least 20 years of continuous writing to complete by hand, and yet it looks like it was written in a single burst. The Codex Gigas is more than just long. It's strange. Some of its content is expected. Religious texts, medical knowledge, and chronicles of kingdoms. But then, there are spells, curses against illness, instructions for summoning spirits, a guide to curing possession, and rituals to protect oneself from evil. It is both a sacred manuscript and a manual of the occult, a paradox bound in leather. So, where has this massive book been for the last 800 years? Its journey is as strange as its contents. After the dissolution of the Podlazice monastery, the Codex passed into the hands of other religious orders and libraries. By the 16th century, it was housed in the royal library of Rudolf II, the Holy Roman Emperor, a ruler known for his obsession with the occult and alchemy. Eventually, it ended up in Sweden, looted during the 30 Years' War, and stored in the Royal Library in Stockholm. In 1697, a great fire broke out in the castle where it was kept. As flames spread, a librarian threw the massive book out a window to save it. It hit the ground, damaging its corner, but survived. Just barely. Even fire could not destroy it. Today, the Codex Gigas rests in a temperature-controlled vault in the Swedish National Library. It can be viewed by appointment or examined online in digital format. Its pages are made of vellum, calfskin, and researchers estimate that the skins of 160 animals were needed to create it. And still, no one knows exactly who wrote it or why. There is no name, no author's mark, only the image of a devil staring out from the shadows of time. Is the Codex Gigas cursed? Some think so. Caretakers have reported unexplained accidents, bad dreams, and a sense of dread surrounding the book. Skeptics call it superstition, believers call it a warning, and others. They just call it a mystery that was never meant to be solved. It is, after all, a book that contains both light and dark, a scripture of contradictions, a sacred manuscript with the devil's face inside, a work of genius or a gift from something else. And so it sits, heavy and silent, in a glass case in Stockholm, its pages unturned, its secrets unspoken, its legend still growing. In November of 1922, under the golden sands of Egypt's Valley of the Kings, a British archaeologist named Howard Carter made one of the most extraordinary discoveries in history. After years of searching, he had found the tomb of Tutankhamun, the boy king who ruled Egypt over 3,000 years ago, a pharaoh whose name had been lost to time until now. The tomb was nearly untouched, sealed, undisturbed. Inside, glittering treasures filled the chambers, golden statues, chariots, thrones, and a solid gold coffin. It was a discovery that would shake the world. But in the weeks and months that followed, something strange began to happen. People started to die. The idea of a pharaoh's curse had floated through legends and whispers for centuries, warnings that ancient Egyptian tombs were protected by dark forces, and that anyone who dared to disturb the resting place of a king would face unspeakable consequences. Most scholars dismissed it as myth, but what followed the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb was enough to make even skeptics wonder. It began with a man named Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy British aristocrat who had funded Carter's excavation. Just 5 months after the tomb was opened, Carnarvon fell ill. He had been bitten by a mosquito on his cheek. The bite became infected. Within days, he was dead, from blood poisoning and pneumonia. And here's where it gets strange. At the very moment Carnarvon died, the lights in Cairo went out. All across the city, a blackout. Unexplained, sudden. And thousands of miles away in England, Carnarvon's beloved dog, Susie, let out a long howl and dropped dead. The press seized on it. The curse of the pharaohs, they claimed, had taken its first victim, and soon others followed. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who x-rayed the mummy, dead. George J. Gould, a wealthy American who visited the tomb, dead. Aubrey Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's half-brother, dead. Arthur Mace, Carter's close associate, dead. Richard Bethel, Carter's personal secretary, dead under suspicious circumstances. Bethel's father died of a heart attack shortly after reading his son's obituary. Within a decade, more than a dozen people associated with the tomb had died under unusual, often violent conditions. The pattern was hard to ignore. Egyptologists tried to remain rational. Many of the victims were older or already ill. The desert's bacteria, the mold in sealed tombs, or psychological stress could explain much of it. Still, the pattern persisted. When the tomb was opened, an inscription was rumored to have been found carved into the stone wall. It read, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king's rest." Whether the inscription truly existed or was invented by the media remains unclear, but the words stuck. There are darker theories too. Some believe that the tombs of the pharaohs were deliberately rigged to protect them in the afterlife, filled with poisonous mold, toxins, or even curses, etched in words of power. Other theories suggest that Tutankhamun's spirit, or the gods of the underworld, unleashed vengeance on those who defiled sacred ground. Howard Carter himself, the man who found the tomb, lived another 17 years. He died of natural causes in 1939. Some say that proves the curse is a myth. But others claim that Carter had been protected by ancient rituals or by avoiding certain transgressions, and that he left warning signs for future explorers. Even today, some archaeologists refuse to work in certain chambers, claiming feelings of unease, unexplained illness, or terrifying dreams after contact with tomb artifacts. Museums that display items from Tutankhamun's tomb have reported malfunctions, security failures, and even paranormal events. And yet, we keep digging. In 2007, Egyptologist Dr. Zahi Hawass reopened the tomb with new technology. He dismissed the curse as superstition, but even he admitted, strange things happen in Egypt, things that defy science, things that feel old and watchful. And whether it's real or imagined, the curse of the pharaohs continues to haunt the public imagination because it taps into something deeper than history. It whispers that some doors should not be opened, that the dead remember, and that power, once buried, may still echo beneath the sand. Tonight, the treasures of Tutankhamun rest in guarded vaults and museum cases, but the question lingers, was it worth it? What did we wander in that chamber? And are we still paying the price? Perhaps the ancient kings had it right all along. Their tombs were not just graves, they were warnings, and the desert keeps its secrets forever. War has a profound effect on the human psyche. It creates an atmosphere of heightened tension where fear and paranoia can blur the line between perception and reality. In the early months of 1942, the United States was reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the West Coast lived in a state of constant anxiety, bracing for an attack that seemed not a matter of if, but when. It was in this climate of fear that the skies over a major American city erupted in a chaotic, one-sided battle against a phantom enemy, an event that remains one of the most baffling episodes of World War II. This is the story of the Battle of Los Angeles. The night of February 24, 1942 began with a warning. United States Naval Intelligence issued an alert that a Japanese attack could be expected within the next 10 hours. Across Southern California, coastal defenses were put on high alert. The day passed without incident, but the tension was palpable. That evening, a radio address from President Franklin D. Roosevelt spoke of a world at war and the need for vigilance, adding to the city's sense of unease. Just a few hours later, in the early morning of February 25th, the sirens began to wail. At 1:44 a.m., radar operators picked up an unidentified target approximately 120 miles west of Los Angeles. Within the hour, anti-aircraft batteries were reporting sightings of enemy aircraft. By 2:25 a.m., a citywide blackout was ordered, plunging the sprawling metropolis of millions into darkness. The sky was swept by the powerful beams of searchlights, hunting for the intruder. At 3:16 a.m., the order was given to open fire. The night sky above Los Angeles exploded in a terrifying display of military firepower. The 37th Coast Artillery Brigade began firing their 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells into the darkness. For the next 58 minutes, the barrage was relentless. Over 1,400 shells were fired into the sky, their explosions lighting up the clouds and raining shrapnel down onto the city below. Citizens, roused from their beds by the sirens and the thunderous roar of the guns, watched in a mixture of terror and awe. Witnesses reported seeing objects in the sky. Descriptions varied wildly. Some saw a single, large, slow-moving object seemingly impervious to the shells exploding all around it. Others reported seeing formations of planes, anywhere from 1 to 25, moving at different altitudes and speeds. The object or objects appeared to travel from Santa Monica to Long Beach, lingering over defense plants and shipyards before vanishing. When the all-clear was finally given at 7:21 a.m., The city emerged from darkness to assess the situation. The results were perplexing. There was no evidence of any bombs being dropped. No downed enemy aircraft were found, nor any wreckage. The only damage was self-inflicted. Buildings and cars were riddled with holes from friendly fire, and tragically, 5 civilians had died, 2 from heart attacks attributed to the stress of the hour-long bombardment, and 3 in traffic accidents during the blackout. The official explanation from the military was a confusing and contradictory mess. Initially, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox held a press conference and dismissed the entire event as a false alarm, attributing it to war nerves. This explanation was immediately and angrily contradicted by the army, who insisted that their batteries had been firing at genuine targets. The War Department then suggested that the targets might have been commercial aircraft operated by enemy agents to create a panic. In the weeks and months that followed, the official story continued to shift. The most enduring explanation became that the initial radar contact was likely a lost weather balloon, and the subsequent sightings and shell bursts were simply the result of jumpy, inexperienced gunners firing at shell fragments, flares, and their own searchlights reflected on the clouds. But this explanation has never satisfied many who witnessed the event, or the researchers who have studied it since. Thousands of credible eyewitnesses, including police officers and air raid wardens, maintain that they saw structured craft in the sky. A famous photograph, published in the Los Angeles Times, appears to show searchlight beams converging on a distinct, saucer-like object. While the photo was heavily retouched for publication, as was common practice at the time, the original negative still suggests something tangible was caught in the lights. Could a simple weather balloon have triggered such a massive and sustained military response? Would trained artillerymen really fire over 1,400 high-explosive shells at their own flak bursts for nearly an hour? The Battle of Los Angeles remains a deeply perplexing historical anomaly. Was it a textbook case of mass hysteria? A city so primed for attack that it conjured an enemy from the darkness? Was it a genuine, albeit unidentified craft that brazenly flew through a storm of anti-aircraft fire, completely unscathed? Or was it, as some have quietly suggested, something else entirely? A probe not from a foreign nation, but from somewhere else. The truth of what lit up the sky that night lies buried under decades of conflicting reports and official denials, a mystery as deep and as dark as the blacked-out city itself. The human mind is a landscape of profound mystery. Its connection to the physical body is a complex dance of chemistry and electricity that science is only beginning to understand. But there are moments in history when this connection seems to fracture, when the mind rebels against its host, leading to behaviors that defy logic and spread like a contagion. This is the story of a phenomenon that began with a simple joke, but spiraled into a year-long ordeal of uncontrollable, crippling emotion. This is the case of the Tanganyika laughter epidemic. The year was 1962. Tanganyika, a nation on the cusp of independence, was a land of vibrant culture and immense change. Our story begins in the small village of Kazakhstan on the western shore of Lake Victoria. Here, at a mission-run boarding school for girls, an otherwise ordinary day, January 30th, would mark the beginning of an extraordinary psychological crisis. It started innocently enough. 3 students began to laugh at a joke, but their laughter didn't stop. It grew in intensity, becoming hysterical, uncontrollable. Soon the girls were weeping, screaming, and running aimlessly. This strange, convulsive laughter began to spread throughout the classroom. What started with 3 girls soon infected a dozen, then 50, then 95 of the school's 159 pupils. The symptoms were alarming. The fits of laughter would last for hours, sometimes even for days, rendering the girls unable to concentrate or function. They were punctuated by bouts of crying, restlessness, and fear. The teachers and unaffected students watched in helpless confusion as the school descended into chaos. By March, the situation was so unmanageable that the school officials made a drastic decision. They were forced to close the school and send the students home to their respective villages. But this was not the end of the epidemic. It was only the beginning of its journey. As the infected girls returned to their homes, The bizarre affliction traveled with them. In the village of Nchamba, several of the girls, including one of the original three, passed the condition on to other women and girls in the community. Over 200 residents of Nchamba were soon consumed by the same fits of hysterical laughter and crying. The phenomenon was behaving like a virus, jumping from person to person through social contact. The epidemic continued its strange march across the region. As schools in the area reopened, students from affected villages would carry the laughter bug with them, triggering new outbreaks. In total, the epidemic spread to multiple villages and forced the closure of 14 different schools. It affected more than 1,000 people, almost exclusively adolescent girls and young women, though some men and older adults also reported symptoms. The original boarding school in Kazakhstan attempted to reopen in May, but the laughter returned almost immediately, and it was closed once more. It would not successfully reopen until the end of the year. The epidemic finally subsided on its own, some 18 months after it first began. Medical professionals and researchers were baffled. No physical cause could be identified. The affected individuals showed no signs of illness, toxins, or disease. There was no virus, no bacteria, no environmental contaminant. The only common thread was the social environment. The diagnosis, therefore, landed on a rare but documented phenomenon: mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. The theory suggests that the students were suffering from immense stress. They were young girls away from their families, facing high expectations from their parents and teachers in a newly independent nation filled with both promise and uncertainty. The initial laughter from the joke may have acted as a trigger, a release valve for this pent-up anxiety. Seeing their peers in distress, other students subconsciously adopted the same symptoms as a coping mechanism. It was a shared, unconscious response to an intolerable psychological burden. But does this explanation fully satisfy the bizarre nature of the event? Can stress alone truly manifest as such a powerful and contagious physical outburst, one that could incapacitate a community and last for over a year? For the people who lived through it, the laughter was no joke. It was a terrifying and exhausting ordeal that took control of their bodies and minds. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic remains a powerful testament to the mysterious bond between the mind and society. It serves as a chilling reminder that the most frightening contagions aren't always the ones we can see under a microscope. Sometimes the most potent virus is an idea, a feeling, a shared fear that, once unleashed, can take on a life of its own. The line between history and folklore is often blurred, with ancient tales and documented events weaving together to create mysteries that endure for centuries. Few stories illustrate this better than a strange account from 12th century England, a report recorded by two respected chroniclers of the time. It is a tale of two children who appeared as if from another world, their origin and nature a puzzle that confounds historians to this day. This is the enduring enigma of the Green Children of Woolpit. Our story begins in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, England, during the reign of either King Stephen or King Henry II, sometime in the middle of the 12th century. Woolpit was a typical agricultural community, its life dictated by the seasons of the harvest. It was near one of the village's wolf pits, deep excavations used to trap wolves, that local reapers made a discovery that defied all logic. Two children, a boy and a girl, were found wandering alone. They were not remarkable for being lost, but for their appearance. According to the accounts written by Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newborough, two of the most reliable English historians of the era, the children's skin was tinged with a distinct green color. They were dressed in clothes of a strange, unfamiliar material and color, and they spoke a language that no one in the village could understand. The frightened and weeping children were taken to the home of a local landowner, Sir Richard de Calne. There they were offered food, but they refused to eat anything, despite being visibly starved. For days they rejected all sustenance until finally some freshly harvested broad beans were brought into the house. The children, with great eagerness, immediately broke open the beanstalks, searching for the beans within. Finding the pods empty, they began to weep again. When a villager showed them how to open the beans themselves, they ate them ravenously, and for some time would consume nothing else. Tragically, the young boy, who appeared to be the younger of the two, grew listless and sick. Weakened by their ordeal and a strange new diet, he passed away not long after their arrival. The girl, however, survived. She slowly adapted to her new life, gradually learning to eat other foods. As her diet changed, the green hue of her skin began to fade, eventually disappearing completely until she looked like any other English girl. Once she had learned to speak English, she was questioned about her origins. Her story was even more bewildering than her appearance. She claimed that she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land, a subterranean world where the sun never rose and the inhabitants lived in a perpetual twilight. Everything in her world, she explained, was green. She described how one day, while they were tending their father's flocks, they followed the animals into a cave. They heard the sound of bells ringing, and drawn by the beautiful noise, they wandered through the darkness of the cavern for a long time. Suddenly they emerged into a brilliant, blinding light, a stark contrast to their dimly lit homeland. They found themselves at the edge of the Woolpit in Woolpit, where the reapers discovered them, terrified and disoriented by the intensity of the sun. The story of the green girl, who was eventually baptized and given the name Agnes, became a local legend. William of Newburgh noted that she later married a man from King's Lynn, and, despite being described as rather loose and wanton in her conduct, lived a relatively normal life. But what is the truth behind this incredible tale? Theories abound, ranging from the mundane to the extraordinary. Some historians suggest the children were the lost offspring of Flemish immigrants who were heavily persecuted in England at the time. They may have fled an attack, becoming lost and suffering from malnutrition, which can cause a form of anemia that gives the skin a greenish tint. Their strange clothes and language would have simply been Flemish, unfamiliar to the isolated villages of Woolpit. Another theory points to a more terrestrial, yet still strange origin. The children could have been poisoned with arsenic by a guardian who wished to claim their inheritance, only to be abandoned and left for dead. Non-lethal arsenic poisoning can cause chlorosis, a greening of the skin. This could also explain the boy's subsequent death and the girl's loose behavior later in life, as arsenic can affect the nervous system. And then there are the more speculative explanations. Some have interpreted the story literally, suggesting the children were visitors from another dimension, a subterranean world, or even extraterrestrials. Their arrival through a cave and emergence into a blinding light is seen by some as a metaphor for passing through a portal or being transported by a craft. We are left with a story recorded by credible sources, yet filled with impossible details. Were the green children simply lost and sick orphans from a foreign land, their story distorted through the lens of medieval superstition? Or were they, as the girl herself claimed, visitors from a strange, sunless land, whose brief and bewildering appearance in our world remains one of history's most captivating and beautiful mysteries? In the annals of history, there are moments that defy easy explanation, events witnessed by so many they cannot be dismissed, yet so incredible they challenge our understanding of reality itself. Few such events are as baffling or as widely documented as what unfolded in the skies above a small parish in Portugal in the autumn of 1917. This is the story of the miracle of the sun. The year was 1917. The world was engulfed in the Great War. In the officially neutral nation of Portugal, life for many was a simple routine, deeply rooted in faith. In the small hamlet of Aljustrel, near the town of Fatima, 3 young shepherd children, 10-year-old Lucia dos Santos and her younger cousins, Francisco and Jacinta Mato, tended their family's flocks. Their lives were unremarkable, until May 13th. While in a field known as the Cova da Iria, the children reported seeing a flash of light, followed by the appearance of a luminous lady, described as being brighter than the sun. She stood atop a small home oak tree, dressed in white, holding a rosary. The lady asked the children to return to the same spot on the 13th of each month for 6 months. She promised that on the final day, in October, she would reveal her identity and perform a great miracle, so that all may believe. Word of the apparitions began to spread. Each month, the crowds that followed the children to the Cova da Iria grew from a curious few to thousands. The children were met with intense skepticism. They were interrogated by local authorities, ridiculed by the press, and even briefly imprisoned by a provincial administrator desperate to force a confession that it was all a hoax. Yet, their story never wavered. By October 13th, the event had become a national obsession. A massive crowd, estimated between 30,000 and 100,000 people, gathered in the muddy fields. They were a mix of the devout, the curious, and the cynical. Journalists and academics had come from across Portugal, all there to witness either a divine intervention or a public fraud. A cold, torrential downpour had been falling for hours, soaking everyone and turning the fields into a quagmire. Around noon, Lucia called out for the crowd to look at the sun. Then, according to thousands of eyewitness accounts, the rain abruptly stopped. The heavy clouds parted, revealing the sun as an opaque, spinning silver disk that could be looked upon directly without pain. It began to rotate, casting cascading bands of color, yellow, blue, red, purple, across the landscape, coloring the clouds, the trees, and the stunned faces of the crowd. The sun stopped its motion, only to begin a second, and then a third time, each more vivid than the last. Then came the most terrifying part. The sun appeared to detach itself from the sky. It trembled violently, and then seemed to plummet in a zigzag motion toward the terrified crowd. People fell to their knees in the mud, screaming and praying, believing the end of the world had arrived. The heat became intense. Just as it seemed the fiery ball would crash into the earth, it stopped its descent and returned to its normal place in the sky, resuming its familiar blinding brilliance. The ordeal, which lasted about 10 minutes, was over. The crowd slowly rose, in a state of stunned silence. They began to notice one final impossible detail. Their clothes, which had been soaked by hours of rain, were now completely and suddenly dry. The muddy, waterlogged ground was dry as well. So, what truly happened in Fatima? Skeptics have offered numerous explanations, from a rare atmospheric phenomenon known as a sundog to a mass psychological event, a collective hallucination born from intense religious expectation. Yet none of these theories fully account for all the reported phenomena, especially the physical evidence of the heat and the instantly dried clothing and ground. For the believers, and for the thousands of witnesses who maintained their story for the rest of their lives, the answer is simple. It was exactly what was promised: a miracle. The Catholic Church, after more than a decade of cautious investigation, would eventually declare the events worthy of belief. The dancing sun of Fatima remains one of history's most profound mysteries, a moment suspended forever between the known and the unknowable, its truth buried not in ancient myth, but in the documented testimony of tens of thousands of eyes. On the night of December 30th, 2000, in the quiet Tokyo suburb of Setagaya, one of Japan's most disturbing and perplexing murder cases unfolded. The Miyazawa family, Father Mikio, Mother Yasuko, and their children Nina and Rei, were brutally murdered in their home sometime between the late hours of that night and the early morning of New Year's Eve. What makes the case particularly haunting is not only the savagery of the killings, but the baffling behavior of the perpetrator, who lingered in the house for hours after the crime. The Miyazawa home was in a residential development near Soshigaya Park, an area undergoing transition. Many of the surrounding homes had already been vacated to make way for park expansion, leaving the Miyazawas relatively isolated. Despite the area's suburban calm, the family had dealt with some issues in the weeks prior: noises from teenagers in the park at night, a suspicious man seen in the neighborhood. Mikio had even reportedly confronted some of the troublemakers before, yet no one could have anticipated what would happen next. On the morning of December 31st, Yasuko's mother, who lived next door, became concerned when she couldn't reach the family. Using a spare key, she entered their home and made a gruesome discovery. Her daughter Yasuko lay dead at the foot of the staircase. Mikio's body was found upstairs near the computer room. Nina and little Rei were also dead, killed in their beds. All 4 victims had suffered multiple stab wounds. Mikio appeared to have fought back fiercely, sustaining defensive wounds and signs of a violent struggle in the upstairs hallway. The scene was chaotic, yet in its horror, investigators found details that made the case far stranger than a typical home invasion. The killer hadn't just entered, killed, and fled. In fact, evidence suggested he had stayed in the house for hours. He used the family's computer. He ate food from their refrigerator, ice cream and barley tea. He used their bathroom. He left his bloody clothes in the washing machine. He even took a nap on the couch. When police arrived, they found signs that the suspect had changed out of his blood-soaked clothing and into some of Mikio's. His fingerprints were everywhere. His feces, left unflushed in the toilet, even provided a full DNA profile. Yet despite all this, he was gone. The murder weapon, a sashimi knife, had been brought to the home by the killer. It broke during the attack on Mikio, and the killer used another knife from the family's own kitchen to continue. That suggested premeditation, but not professionalism. The killer's behavior didn't match that of a cold, calculated assassin. It was erratic, almost childlike. He rummaged through drawers but stole very little, only a few yen in cash. He left his belongings behind, including a distinctive hip bag, a sweater and a scarf. These clothes, when traced, were linked to a specific brand and store. The particular model of bag, for example, was one of a limited number sold, narrowing down the pool of potential suspects significantly. Yet no match was ever found. Police worked tirelessly. Over 250,000 investigators were assigned to the case over the years, and they followed over 12,000 leads. But no one was ever arrested. The DNA profile, which showed the killer, likely had mixed East Asian heritage, possibly a Korean father and a Japanese mother, was run through multiple databases. No match. The fingerprints, which were clear and plentiful, also never found a match in any known criminal records. The hip bag, produced and sold in limited numbers, provided no buyer information. It was as if the man had appeared from nowhere and vanished just as mysteriously. There were other strange details. Sand found in the bag was traced back to the Nevada desert in the United States, and also to a specific area near a Korean military base. This raised theories about a foreigner, perhaps someone connected to the military or a traveler, but again, nothing conclusive ever emerged. The killer's behavior during the night defied logic. After committing such a violent and frenzied act, he lingered, relaxed, and even engaged with the family's possessions. It was as if he felt no urgency, no remorse, no fear of being caught. Over the years, speculation has run rampant. Some believed it was a personal grudge. Others thought it was a random act by a mentally disturbed individual. There were rumors about gang involvement, though no clear link was found. Some speculated the killer might have been homeless, possibly living in the nearby park, and simply stumbled upon the house. Others wondered if he had been stalking the family, planning the attack for weeks. The presence of the mother-in-law next door complicates the theory of a random break-in. Why risk staying in the house with a close neighbor who could walk in at any time? Despite the meticulous work of investigators, the case remains unsolved. Every year, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police renew their appeal for information. They publish updates, hoping to trigger a memory or encourage a confession. But as time goes on, hope dims. The statute of limitations for murder in Japan was abolished in 2010, so legally the case remains open indefinitely. But in practical terms, leads have dried up. The Setagaya family murders occupy a strange space in the public imagination. They're horrific, yet eerily quiet. Committed not in the shadows of some distant forest, but in a family home, in a suburban neighborhood, during one of the most celebrated times of the year. The killer left behind his DNA, fingerprints, clothing, and even physical waste, but not his identity. He walked into a home and ended 4 lives with unimaginable violence, then sat down, ate their food, used their facilities, and vanished into the night. On the night of March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777-200ER, operated by Malaysia Airlines, designated as Flight MH370, prepared for its routine journey from Kuala Lumpur International Airport to Beijing Capital International Airport. It was a calm, clear night. The plane was carrying 239 people, passengers and crew, families and workers, students and travelers. None of them had any idea that they were about to become part of one of the most haunting mysteries in modern aviation history. At exactly 12:41 a.m. local time, MH370 took off from the runway in Kuala Lumpur and climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The first part of the flight went completely according to plan. The plane made contact with Malaysian air traffic control and was expected to check in with Vietnamese controllers as it crossed over into their airspace. But then, something happened. At 1:19 a.m., the final voice transmission was received from the cockpit. It was calm, uneventful. The words were simple: "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was the last time anyone ever heard from the plane. Just 2 minutes later at 1:21 a.m., the plane's transponder, which sends signals to radar systems, was switched off. Civilian radar could no longer track the aircraft. But military radar continued to follow it for a time, and what it recorded was bizarre. Instead of continuing its path to the northeast toward China, MH370 made a sharp left turn. It flew west across the Malay Peninsula, then turned northwest over the Strait of Malacca. Then it disappeared from radar entirely. At first, Malaysian authorities were slow to act. The flight had been expected in Beijing at 6:30 a.m., and when it didn't arrive, a search was launched. But by then, valuable hours had already been lost. The initial search focused on the South China Sea, where the plane was expected to be. But military radar later forced a stunning admission. The plane hadn't gone east, it had flown west. The search area was expanded dramatically. Over the following days and weeks, an international search effort grew into one of the largest and most expensive in history. More than 20 nations joined in. Satellites, naval ships, aircraft, all scanned vast areas of ocean and land, but no wreckage was found. No distress signal had been sent. No clues were available to explain why the plane had diverted course. Then came a breakthrough. Analysts at a British company, Inmarsat, detected a series of automated signals, pings, between the aircraft and a satellite. These signals, called handshakes, continued for almost 7 hours after the plane's transponder was turned off. They weren't messages, just silent pings showing that the aircraft was still powered, still flying. Using advanced calculations and modeling, the Inmarsat team traced the possible final location of the plane to a remote section of the southern Indian Ocean, far west of Australia. It was here that MH370 was believed to have made its final descent, somewhere along what came to be known as the Seventh Arc. Search teams redirected their efforts to this vast, unforgiving stretch of ocean. The depths here reached over 4,000 meters. The seafloor was mountainous and rugged, a difficult terrain for even the most advanced sonar systems unresolved. Then, years. In 2015, debris was discovered on Réunion Island, a piece of a Boeing 777 wing called a flaperon, which was positively identified as belonging to MH370. More debris would be found in the following months, scattered along coastlines in the western Indian Ocean. But the main wreckage, the fuselage, the black boxes, the passengers, were never recovered. What happened on board MH370 in those final hours remains unknown. Many theories have been proposed. Some suggest catastrophic mechanical failure, although the plane's systems continued transmitting pings for hours. Others suggest hijacking, though no group claimed responsibility and no motive was established. There are even theories of a deliberate act by someone in the cockpit, a suicide mission, although no conclusive evidence has ever emerged. In 2018, after nearly 4 years, the official search was suspended. A private company, Olympic Infinity, conducted an additional search using autonomous underwater vehicles, but they too found nothing. And so to this day, the fate of MH370 remains a mystery, a story suspended between air and sea, fact and speculation. It is a haunting reminder of how, even in our age of satellites and real-time tracking, a modern jetliner can simply vanish from the sky. 239 souls were lost that night, families left with no answers, only silence and sorrow. And somewhere, in the dark waters of the Southern Ocean, the truth still waits to be found. In the summer of 2014, a 28-year-old German man named Lars Mittank went on vacation with friends to Varna, Bulgaria, a popular coastal town along the Black Sea. He was quiet, friendly, and by all accounts perfectly ordinary. But just days later, Lars would vanish without a trace. In broad daylight, from a secure international airport. His final moments were caught on surveillance footage, and they still puzzle investigators and internet sleuths to this day. This is the strange and chilling case of Lars Mittank, a man who seemed to run from something no one else could see. Lars traveled to Bulgaria with a group of friends to enjoy a week of sun, soccer, and drinks by the beach. It was a typical guy's holiday, laid back and full of laughter. But toward the end of the trip, something changed. Lars got into an argument with a group of strangers over football team loyalties. Not long after that, he became anxious, withdrawn. He told his friends he didn't feel safe. One night, he left the group abruptly. The next morning, he told them he'd been beaten up by several men, possibly hired by the same group he'd argued with earlier. He said he had pain in his ear and thought it might be serious. His friends urged him to come back with them to Germany, but Lars insisted on staying behind a few more days to see a doctor. That was the last time they saw him. Lars checked into a cheap hotel near the airport while waiting for his return flight. A doctor examined him and confirmed he had a minor injury, a ruptured eardrum. He prescribed antibiotics and advised against flying until it healed. But something about Lars's behavior at the hotel was off. The hotel staff would later report that Lars seemed paranoid. He was pacing, hiding behind furniture, peeking out windows. At one point, he called his mother from the hotel and whispered, "I don't feel safe. People are following me. I don't know who they are." He told her to cancel his credit cards. Then he left the hotel around midnight and disappeared into the night, but he wasn't gone for long. The next morning, on July 8, 2014, Lars arrived at Varna Airport. He checked in for his flight home to Germany. Everything seemed normal at first. Then he spoke with the airport's on-site physician, perhaps to follow up on his injury before boarding the flight. And then, everything changed. Security footage captured what happened next. Lars stands calmly in the hallway for a few seconds. Suddenly, he bolts. Without warning, he leaves his luggage, his passport, wallet, and phone, and sprints out of the airport terminal. He runs across the parking lot, across traffic. He climbs over a fence and disappears into a nearby field and forest. He was never seen again. Authorities searched the area extensively. Helicopters, dogs, and ground teams found no trace, no body, no clothing, no sightings, nothing. What could have caused a man to run like that, away from safety, from his belongings, from his own flight home? Many theories emerged. Some believe Lars had a psychotic episode, possibly triggered by the antibiotics or stress. A rare side effect of some medications, particularly if combined with dehydration or trauma, can cause severe anxiety and delusions. Others point to his head injury, a ruptured eardrum, potentially accompanied by a concussion, which may have affected his thinking. But his behavior also raised suspicions of something darker. Could Lars have been targeted? He told his mother that men were following him. He claimed someone had hired others to beat him up. Could he have stumbled into criminal activity, seen something he wasn't meant to? Some theorists suggest that, being alone in a foreign country, disoriented and injured, Lars may have genuinely been in danger and tried to flee from it. Others think it was a case of pure paranoia, that the danger was only in his mind. Then there are the more speculative theories involving organ trafficking, intelligence operations, or deep psychological trauma. But there's no proof for any of them. What makes this case especially haunting is the footage. There's something raw about watching a grown man, visibly healthy, run from an unknown threat. His eyes show fear, his body is desperate. But the cameras can't show what he was running from, if anything at all. It's that silence behind his actions that stays with people. A quiet scream, frozen in video. As of today, Lars Mittank remains missing. Despite worldwide media coverage and repeated appeals by his family, no credible sightings have ever been confirmed. Posters with his image still circulate online. His mother continues to hope, to search, to wait. And the questions remain. What happened to Lars? What did he see? What was he running from? Or Was he only running from something inside his mind? Maybe someday the truth will surface in a phone call, a memory, or a discovery in a forgotten field. But until then, Lars Mittank's story remains one of the internet's most unsettling disappearances. A young man, a sunny day, an airport, and a mystery that ran out into the tall grass and never came back. In the quiet town of Hexham, England, during the early 1950s, a tragic accident would spark one of the strangest and most debated cases in the realm of the unexplained. It's a story that raises questions about life, death, memory, and the possibility of something more. This is the story of the Pollock Twins. John and Florence Pollock were a devout Catholic couple raising their family in Northumberland. They had two daughters, Joanna, age 11, and Jacqueline, age 6. Life was simple and steady, and the girls were happy. But that all changed on the morning of May 5th, 1957. Joanna and Jacqueline were walking to church with a friend when they were struck by a car. The driver was a local woman under the influence of drugs and mentally unwell. All three children died instantly. The community was devastated. John and Florence were crushed. It was a loss that no parent should ever endure, losing not one but both daughters in an instant. In the months that followed, John Pollock became obsessed with the idea that his daughters would return to him. A devout believer in reincarnation, he prayed constantly that Joanna and Jacqueline would somehow come back. Florence, more skeptical, didn't share his beliefs. The grief drove a wedge between them. But then, in 1958, about a year after the accident, Florence became pregnant again. To the surprise of doctors, she gave birth to identical twin girls. They named them Gillian and Jennifer. From the very beginning, things seemed off. Though identical twins share the same genetic code, the girls had very different birthmarks. Jennifer, the younger by a few minutes, had a birthmark on her waist that was eerily similar to one Jacqueline had. She also had a second mark on her forehead, in nearly the same spot where Jacqueline had once fallen and injured herself badly. As the twins grew, the strange coincidences became harder to ignore. They began asking for toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline, without ever being told about them. When the parents brought down the old toys from the attic, the twins immediately assigned the correct ones to each former sister. Jennifer gravitated toward Jacqueline's doll, Gillian toward Joanna's. At the age of 4, the family visited their old home in Hexham. Though the girls had never been there before, they began pointing out landmarks they shouldn't have known. "That's the school we used to go to," one of them said. Another time, Jennifer pointed to a swing set and said, "That's where we had our accident." When a car engine started nearby, both girls reportedly clung to each other in terror, screaming that the car was coming to get them. John and Florence hadn't told them about the deaths. They were still very young, and the parents had tried to shield them from the past. But it was as if the memories lived on in the girls, fragments from another life they had no way of knowing. Psychiatrists and skeptics have offered explanations. Some say it was the result of parental suggestion. That John, so obsessed with the idea of reincarnation, may have unconsciously influenced the girls, talking in his sleep, dropping hints, allowing them to pick up on unspoken memories. Others believe the girls were simply responding to environmental cues, creating false memories the way children sometimes do. Still, the level of detail they recalled, things even Florence swore they had never discussed in front of the twins, left many baffled. The case caught the attention of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychologist at the University of Virginia who had spent decades studying cases of alleged reincarnation. He interviewed the Pollock family extensively and documented the case in detail. For him, the Pollock twins were one of the strongest Western cases he had encountered. It had everything: verified memories, matching birthmarks, a tragic death, and a family with no known history of fabrication or fantasy. And yet, no proof. Only testimony, only mystery. As the twins grew older, the memories faded. By age 7, neither Jennifer nor Gillian could recall anything unusual about their early childhood. The sense of connection to Joanna and Jacqueline seemed to dissolve, as if a door had quietly closed. They went on to live normal lives, unaware for many years of the strange attention their case had drawn. Only later in adulthood did they learn about the full story, and how many saw them as evidence of something extraordinary. The Pollock case remains one of the most discussed examples in parapsychology circles. For believers in reincarnation, it is proof, children reborn with memories of past lives. For skeptics, it is a case of suggestion, coincidence, and the human brain's tendency to find patterns where none exist. But the questions linger. How did the twins know about toys they had never seen? Why did Jennifer bear marks so similar to Jacqueline? Why did they speak about a car accident they were never told about? Even if we discard the idea of reincarnation, the case reveals something deeper, about grief, memory, and how far the human mind can reach to make sense of loss. Perhaps the story is less about supernatural return, and more about the powerful ways trauma and hope shape a family. Or perhaps, just perhaps, there are things we still don't understand about identity, consciousness, and time. In the end, the story of the Pollock twins stands in that grey area between science and the unknown. A quiet town. A tragic accident. 2 children lost. 2 born again. And the possibility that death may not be as final as we once thought. History is filled with official records of impossible events, moments when the sky itself seemed to rebel against the known laws of nature. In an age before a scientific understanding of the cosmos, these phenomena were often seen as divine omens, warnings, or prophecies. But few historical accounts are as specific, as detailed, and as utterly bizarre as the one documented in a news broadsheet from the heart of 16th century Germany. The date was April 14th, 1561. The city was Nuremberg, a bustling and influential center of trade and art in the Holy Roman Empire. As the sun rose, casting its first light over the city, the citizens who were awake to witness it saw something that would be recorded as a terrifying and magnificent spectacle. What they saw was not a sunrise, but what could only be described as a celestial battle. According to a famous woodcut and text created by Hans Glaser, a printer and publisher of the time, the sky was filled with a multitude of objects. The account describes large cylinders from which emerged numerous red, black, orange, and blue-white spheres. There were also crosses the color of blood and 2 great pipes or rods, from which more spheres were said to have been fired as if from cannons. For the duration of an hour, these objects appeared to engage in an aerial melee. They darted and fought amongst themselves, a chaotic and silent ballet in the dawn sky. The broadsheet reports that the objects fought one another vehemently until they were exhausted. Then, as the battle concluded, the spheres and other shapes were seen to fall from the sun, plummeting towards the earth outside the city, where they vanished in a thick cloud of smoke. To complete the eerie scene, a final ominous object was described. A long, pointed shape, like a great black spear, appearing in the sky. This was not a vague piece of folklore passed down through whispers. It was a contemporary news report, printed and circulated for the public to read. The broadsheet served as a warning, urging people to repent, interpreting the otherworldly battle as a sign of divine anger. But what did Hans Glaser and the citizens of Nuremberg actually witness? For centuries, the event has been a cornerstone for ufologists and ancient astronaut theorists. To them, the description is unmistakable: a dogfight between alien spacecraft, with motherships, smaller fighter craft, and energy weapons. The detailed shapes, cylinders, crosses, and spheres seem too specific and too technological to be anything natural. Was this an open conflict between extraterrestrial visitors, witnessed by a pre-industrial society that could only describe it in the terms they knew? Science, however, offers more grounded, though perhaps less spectacular, explanations. The most common theory points to a complex and rare series of atmospheric optical phenomena. Events like sundogs or parhelia can create bright spots and halos in the sky that seem to flank the sun. Combined with light pillars and other reflections caused by ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, it's possible that a stunning but entirely natural light show occurred. The fighting could simply be an anthropomorphic interpretation of the natural shimmering movements of these light phenomena as atmospheric conditions shifted. A third theory looks to the historical context. The year 1561 was a time of immense religious and social anxiety in Europe. The Protestant Reformation had fractured the Christian world, and the fear of divine judgment and the apocalypse was palpable. It's possible the event was symbolic, an allegorical broadsheet using the imagery of war in the heavens to comment on the religious conflicts on Earth. The crosses and cannons would have been powerful, easily understood symbols for its audience. Yet none of these theories perfectly satisfy all the details of the report. A sundog does not typically last for an hour, nor does it involve objects falling from the sky and producing smoke. And if it was purely a symbolic story, why report it with the specificity of a real time-stamped event witnessed by many? The celestial phenomenon over Nuremberg remains an unsolved file from history. Whether it was a misunderstood natural event, a symbolic warning, or, as some believe, a brief glimpse into a conflict far beyond our world, we may never know. The account exists as a chilling artifact, a 500-year-old news report of a battle in the sky, leaving us to wonder what truly filled the dawn with such terrible light. In the mid-19th century, the world was gripped by a race not for land or riches, but for discovery. At the heart of it was a cold, treacherous route, known as the Northwest Passage, a maritime path through the Arctic, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. To find this route was considered the pinnacle of exploration. And in 1845, the British Empire, proud and confident in its naval dominance, launched one of its most ambitious missions, the Franklin Expedition. Led by Sir John Franklin, a seasoned naval officer and explorer, the expedition departed England with 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Together they carried 129 men, all experienced sailors and explorers, and provisions for 3 years. The ships were marvels of the time, reinforced for ice and outfitted with the latest technology, including steam engines and even heated water systems. They were last seen by Europeans in July 1845 by whalers in Baffin Bay, as the ships prepared to head deeper into the Arctic. And then, nothing. For over a year, no word came from the expedition. At first, there was little concern. Delays in Arctic voyages were not uncommon. But as time passed, worry turned to fear. In 1848, the first of many search missions was launched. Over the next decade, dozens of rescue and recovery expeditions would follow, some funded by the Royal Navy, others by Franklin's determined wife, Lady Jane Franklin. What they uncovered was both haunting and incomplete. In 1850, remains of winter camps were found on Beechey Island, including the graves of 3 crew members who had died in the expedition's first year. But the ships themselves were gone, and the fate of the rest of the crew remained a mystery. Then came chilling evidence. In 1854, Scottish explorer John Ray encountered Inuit hunters who spoke of white men dying of starvation near the mouth of the Back River. They had seen bodies, and more disturbingly, evidence of cannibalism. The British establishment refused to accept these reports, too horrifying, too un-British. The idea that Royal Navy sailors, paragons of discipline and honor, would resort to eating one another was unthinkable. Even Charles Dickens wrote publicly against the idea, blaming the Inuit instead. But Ray's reports would later prove closer to the truth than anyone wanted to admit. In 1859, a breakthrough. An expedition led by Francis Leopold McClintock found a note on King William Island. It had been left in a cairn and contained 2 entries. The first, dated May 1847, said all was well, that Franklin was commanding the ships, which were trapped in ice but intact. The second note, added nearly a year later, painted a grim picture. It said that the ships had been abandoned in April 1848 after being stuck in ice for over a year and a half. Franklin was dead, along with 23 others. The remaining 105 men were setting out on foot, hoping to reach safety. Skeletons were found, scattered along the presumed escape route. Some showed signs of sawing and knife marks, suggesting that, in the final stages, cannibalism had occurred. And then, for over a century, silence again. It wasn't until the 21st century that the final pieces began to emerge. In 2014, after years of searching, a Canadian team discovered the wreck of HMS Erebus in the Queen Maud Gulf. 2 years later, HMS Terror was also found, astonishingly well preserved on the seafloor. It appeared almost ghostly, its masts down, its hull intact as though it had simply drifted to sleep beneath the ice. The discovery of the ships opened new avenues for research. Divers found dishes still stacked neatly, boots still sitting on shelves. Human remains were located as well, some showing signs of lead poisoning, possibly from poorly sealed canned food or contaminated water systems on board. Lead, cold, scurvy, and isolation all may have contributed to the crew's slow and terrifying demise, but many questions remain unanswered. Why were the ships abandoned if they were still intact? Why did the men set off on foot with limited provisions into one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth? Did leadership fail them? Or were they simply overwhelmed by a situation no amount of planning could have foreseen? Even today, forensic scientists continue to study the recovered remains, hoping to identify individuals and better understand their final days. The mystery of the Franklin expedition has captivated historians, explorers, and storytellers for nearly 2 centuries. It's a tragedy frozen in time, wrapped in snow, ice, and silence. And in that silence, 129 men, ambitious, brave, and tragically doomed, remain a solemn chapter in the history of exploration. They left behind no final words, only scattered bones, abandoned ships, and the cold whisper of the Arctic wind. On the evening of February 19, 1994, paramedics rushed a woman into the emergency room of Riverside General Hospital in California. Her name was Gloria Ramirez. She was 31 years old, a mother of 2, and she was suffering from late-stage cervical cancer. She was short of breath, confused, and her heart was beating far too fast. Within minutes, the ER staff began trying to stabilize her. But what happened next was something no one in the room had ever experienced, or could fully explain. It was the beginning of one of the strangest medical mysteries in modern history. As the team worked to save Gloria's life, nurses began to notice something unusual. Her body had a strange, oily sheen. A fruity, garlic-like smell clung to her skin, and when a nurse drew her blood, she saw odd particles floating in the vial, almost like crystals. Suddenly, several staff members began to feel sick. One nurse fainted. Another began to vomit and reported that her face was burning. A third passed out and had to be wheeled out on a gurney. In total, 23 people became ill and 5 were hospitalized, all within minutes of being near Gloria Ramirez. And then, she died. Gloria was declared dead at 8:50 p.m., just 45 minutes after she arrived at the hospital, but the mystery was far from over. Why had her body triggered such a severe reaction in the medical staff, and what exactly had they been exposed to? The media quickly dubbed her the Toxic Lady, and as news of the event spread, the public became both fascinated and afraid. The hospital was evacuated, hazmat teams were called in, the ER was sealed, and Gloria's body was placed in a sealed aluminum coffin and examined by a team in full biohazard suits. For weeks, no one was allowed to touch her remains. An autopsy revealed little. No signs of foul play, no poisons, no known chemicals that could explain what had happened. Her death was ruled the result of organ failure due to cancer. But that didn't explain why trained medical personnel had collapsed simply by being near her. So theories began to surface. One theory came from California's Department of Health. They suggested that the symptoms were caused by mass hysteria, a psychological reaction to stress and suggestion. In this version, the staff simply panicked and unintentionally triggered each other's symptoms. But many doctors strongly disagreed. Several of the affected staff had experienced real physical symptoms: low blood pressure, respiratory distress, and even hepatitis. These were not just imagined. Then came a second theory, one that seemed almost too strange to believe, and yet might be true. It goes like this. Because Gloria Ramirez was terminally ill, she may have been using dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, as a home remedy. In the 1960s, DMSO was used as a pain reliever, but was later banned for human use due to safety concerns. However, it was still sold as a solvent in hardware stores. If Gloria had applied DMSO to her skin and it built up in her system, then something incredible may have happened in the ER. According to this theory, when hospital staff administered oxygen and used defibrillators to try and revive her, The electric shock converted the DMSO into dimethyl sulfate, a toxic, highly dangerous chemical that can vaporize at room temperature. Dimethyl sulfate can cause convulsions, coma, and even death when inhaled, and it could explain the sudden collapse of multiple people in close proximity. It's a compelling theory, but it was never proven. To this day, no scientific study has confirmed that this exact chemical reaction took place, and no one has ever recreated it in a lab. Gloria's family strongly rejected the chemical theory. They believed the hospital had made a mistake, that she had been given improper care, and that the staff was covering it up. They fought for years to find the truth, but answers remained elusive. Eventually, her body was released and she was buried. 2 months after her death, far later than most cases. Her children were left without their mother, and the people who had tried to save her were left with lasting symptoms and questions that have never been fully answered. The case of Gloria Ramirez is now a staple in forensic science courses and toxicology discussions. It's a story that sits somewhere between science and speculation, fact and fear. Was she truly toxic, or did fear spread faster than the facts? We may never know. But what remains is this. A woman entered the hospital seeking help. She left behind not just grief, but mystery. And even now, as the years pass, the name Gloria Ramirez still lingers, like a strange vapor in the air, unanswered and unexplained. Alexander the Great, a name that echoes through history. A conqueror, a visionary, a man who by the age of 32 had created one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, stretching from Greece to Egypt, across Persia and into India. And yet, for all his triumphs, for all the stories told about his life, no one knows exactly where he was buried. The tomb of Alexander the Great, the final resting place of one of history's most legendary figures, has been missing for over 2,000 years. This is the story of how it disappeared, and why no one has been able to find it since. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE, under mysterious circumstances. Some say it was fever, others poison. Whatever the cause, his body was said to be placed in a gold sarcophagus within a gold casket and surrounded by riches worthy of a god. Initially, it was planned that his body would be buried in Macedonia, his homeland, but something changed. Somewhere along the journey, the funeral procession was intercepted by one of his generals, Ptolemy I Sota. Ptolemy had other plans. He diverted the body to Egypt. Why? Because in the ancient world, possessing Alexander's remains wasn't just about honor, it was about power. Whoever controlled the tomb could claim a piece of his legacy. And Ptolemy, who would go on to found the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, wanted exactly that. Alexander's body was brought to Memphis, Egypt. There, he was entombed, at least temporarily. But the real destination was Alexandria, a grand new city founded by Alexander himself, a city that would become one of the most important centers of learning and culture in the ancient world. According to multiple ancient sources, Alexander's remains were eventually moved to Alexandria and placed in a magnificent tomb, a mausoleum fit for a god-king. Over the centuries, historical figures from Julius Caesar to Augustus to Caligula reportedly visited the tomb. Some claim to have seen the body, others left offerings. Caligula is even said to have taken Alexander's breastplate as a souvenir. But after a few centuries, the trail begins to vanish. By the 3rd or 4th century CE, references to the tomb become fewer and then stop altogether. Some historians believe it was destroyed in a series of earthquakes that struck Alexandria. Others say it was buried under layers of rubble and new construction as the city changed hands, from Greeks to Romans to Arabs. There are even accounts that the tomb was converted into a Christian church during the Byzantine era and later demolished or forgotten. The exact location? Lost. Despite hundreds of years of searching, no one has definitively found the tomb. Archaeologists have scoured the streets of modern Alexandria, a chaotic, densely packed city where ancient ruins lie beneath modern concrete. Excavations have turned up temples, statues, and ancient streets. Over the years, countless theories have emerged. Some believe the tomb lies beneath the Mosque of Nabi Daniel, where a sealed crypt may hold ancient remains. Others think it could be under a neighborhood now unreachable due to modern development. And some believe it may lie elsewhere entirely, still in Memphis perhaps, or even lost during the transportation from Babylon. Despite the mystery, the story has never stopped captivating imaginations. In 1995, a Greek archaeologist claimed to have discovered the tomb in Siwa Oasis, the same place where Alexander was once declared a god by the Oracle of Amun. But the evidence was thin. In 2014, excitement rose again when a massive tomb was uncovered in Amphipolis, Greece, a place linked to Alexander's family. Could it be his final resting place? As it turned out, the tomb was grand, but it belonged to others. Still, the search continues. What makes this mystery so haunting is not just that a tomb is missing, but whose tomb it is. This was no ordinary king. This was Alexander, a man who shaped the world, inspired legends, and died believing himself to be more than mortal. And yet, like so many before and after him, he vanished, buried somewhere beneath the dust of history. Some say the world isn't ready to find his tomb. Others believe it was never meant to be found, that Alexander, who was once seen as a living god, now rests where no one can disturb him. But if the tomb is ever uncovered, it could be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time. Until then, we are left with myths, maps, and ruins, and the image of a golden coffin lost somewhere beneath the shifting sands of time. In the summer of 1954, on a warm day in Tokyo, a man stepped off a plane and entered Haneda Airport. He was middle-aged, clean-shaven, and wore a tailored grey suit. He carried a leather briefcase and looked every bit the international businessman. Everything about him seemed ordinary. Until customs asked to see his passport. It looked official, well-worn, real, but the country it listed? Taured, and that changed everything. The customs officers were puzzled. Taured didn't exist, not on any map, not in any database. They asked him to point it out. Calmly he did. He said Taured was located between France and Spain, nestled in the Pyrenees. He even pulled out a map of Europe and seemed genuinely confused when Andorra occupied the spot where Taured should have been. Taured has existed for over 1,000 years, he reportedly said. The man spoke fluent French, passable Japanese, and claimed this was his third business trip to Japan that year. His briefcase contained company documents, stamped paperwork, contracts. Everything looked authentic, until you looked closer. The passport, though intricate, didn't match the design of any known nation. The stamps inside were from real countries, Japan, Germany, and others, but many were unfamiliar to the immigration staff. Still, he seemed completely sincere. He wasn't panicked or evasive. He was cooperative, even polite. But when they called the company listed in his documents, no one had heard of him. His hotel reservation did not exist. The bank that had issued his checkbook didn't exist either. Authorities were unsure what to do. They couldn't let him enter the country, but they also couldn't charge him with anything. He had a passport, money, and a reason to be there, but none of it could be verified. So they placed him in a hotel room under guard. 2 immigration officers stood outside the door all night. He was told to remain inside while the investigation continued. He agreed. The next morning they opened the door. The room was empty. The windows hadn't been opened. The door was never unlocked. No one had entered or exited. His suitcase, documents, and passport, all gone. The man had vanished. Airport officials searched for days. They contacted embassies. They tried to match his fingerprints. Nothing came back. He was never seen again. So, who was the man from Taured? There are theories, many. Some believe it was a hoax, a fabricated story passed around and distorted over time. No original police reports or official documents have ever surfaced. No names, no photographs. Skeptics argue it's an urban legend, fueled by Cold War paranoia and the mystique of international travel in the mid-20th century. But if it was just a story, why has it lasted so long? Others believe it was something stranger, that he was a dimensional traveler, someone who slipped into our world from a parallel version of Earth, where Taured does exist. According to this theory, he simply found himself in the wrong timeline, a place almost identical to his own, but with subtle differences. When the reality mismatch was discovered, some say, the universe corrected itself, and he was pulled back. This kind of anomaly has a name in fringe science, a reality slip. People who experience them claim to notice things that shouldn't be different, logos that are wrong, historical facts that have changed, memories that don't match the world around them. The man from Taured may be the most extreme example, a traveler from somewhere that almost exists, but not quite. In the end, we don't know what happened. No paper trail, no confirmation, just a persistent, unsettling tale. A man who showed up with a passport from nowhere, was questioned, held, and then vanished, like a shadow between worlds. Whether myth, mistake, or something more, the story of the man from Taured still resonates, because it taps into something deep and uneasy, the idea that the world is not as fixed as we think, that perhaps there are other versions of history, other borders, other realities, only a heartbeat away. And every now and then someone slips through. In the quiet hills of Dumbarton, Scotland, just beyond the city, sits a bridge that looks like it belongs in a fairy tale. Stone arches rise over a narrow gorge, ivy crawling along the sides, the wind whispering through trees that have stood for generations. It's the kind of place where time slows down, where everything feels still. But beneath that calm, something is wrong. Locals say this bridge is cursed. They say the air shifts when you stand on it too long, that animals act strangely, and that people who come here don't always leave the same. This is Overtoun Bridge, and it might be the most quietly haunted place in all of Scotland. It started slowly. A few strange reports, a handful of stories passed around between dog walkers and hikers. Then over time the pattern emerged, and it was impossible to ignore. Dogs weren't just acting odd near the bridge, they were jumping from it, leaping over the stone ledge, without warning, without hesitation. Some survived the fall into the rocky gorge below, most did not, and it kept happening. Since the 1950s, over 50 dogs, some say over 100, have jumped to their deaths at Overtoun Bridge, nearly all of them from the same spot between the final two parapets on the right-hand side. They were all long-nosed breeds, retrievers, collies, labradors, dogs known for their sensitivity, intelligence, and loyalty. Owners described the same thing every time. Their dog would be calm, then alert, then bolt toward the edge and leap off, as if chasing something only they could see. Some dogs that survived ran back up to the bridge and jumped again. Naturally, people began to look for answers. Some scientists proposed a scent-based theory, that the bridge's structure channels the smell of mink from the gorge below, triggering an uncontrollable hunting response in certain dogs. Others suggested acoustic anomalies, strange echoes or vibrations that disorient dogs but go unnoticed by humans. But none of these theories explained everything. Why always the same types of dogs? Why the same part of the bridge? Why do some animals leap again, as if obsessed? And then there's the human side of Overtoun. Because it isn't just animals who've been affected by this place. In 1994, a man named Kevin Moy, 32 years old, brought his infant son to the bridge. Moy was known to be deeply religious, but he had also been battling untreated paranoid schizophrenia. On that day, something inside him broke. He became convinced his newborn was the Antichrist, that the child was evil, that he had to be destroyed. And so, on a bright afternoon, he stood on Overtoun Bridge and threw his son into the gorge below. The baby died instantly. When police arrived, Moy tried to jump as well. He survived and was taken into custody. In court, he gave a chilling explanation. "I had to do it here. Overtoun is where heaven and earth meet." The phrase echoed something locals had said for generations. That Overtoun was a thin place, a space where the boundary between the material world and the spiritual one is delicate, porous, fraying. Some Celtic traditions speak of such places as sacred or cursed, places of transition, places where the living and the dead might cross paths. The bridge itself leads to Overtoun House, a stately Victorian mansion that has served many roles. A noble estate, a hospital, a religious retreat. Over the years, residents have reported cold spots, sudden dizziness, feelings of being watched. Some say the estate has always been strange. Others say it only changed when the first body hit the rocks below. Whatever the truth, People agree on one thing. Something isn't right here. People today still walk the bridge. Tourists take photos. Children feed ducks near the gorge. But the locals know. They keep their dogs leashed. They don't linger near the edge. And they speak quietly when they talk about what's happened here. Because some things can be explained, and some things can't. Was Kevin Moy driven by delusion? Or did something about this place push him? The way it pushes dogs? Was it mental illness alone? Or was he right about this being a place between worlds? Even the scientists admit they don't have a full answer, and so the bridge remains. Quiet, green, beautiful in the kind of way that makes you nervous once you know the stories. Some say the stone holds memory. That energy can imprint itself on places like this. That grief and tragedy ripple out. And maybe something on the other side is calling back. Today, warning signs stand at each end of Overtoun Bridge. Dangerous drop, keep dogs on leash. But signs don't stop fate, and every now and then someone passes through. A dog stiffens at that final stone railing. A person lingers a bit too long, listening to the silence. And something stirs. In the vast, empty plains of northern Kazakhstan, surrounded by wheat fields and silence, there is a small, nearly forgotten village called Kalachi. It looks like any other quiet farming town. A few roads, modest homes, children playing in dust-covered yards. But for a time, Kalachi was different, very different, because the people of Kalachi couldn't stay awake. Men, women, children. One by one, they began to fall asleep, suddenly, deeply, and for days at a time. This is the story of Kalachi sleep syndrome, a real-life mystery that left an entire village afraid to close their eyes. The first case was reported in March of 2013. A woman named Raisa was out for a walk when she suddenly collapsed. Her breathing slowed, her pulse weakened. She was rushed to the hospital where doctors found she was in a deep, coma-like sleep. But when she woke up 2 days later, she was fine, confused but unharmed. It was strange, but no one thought much of it, until it happened again and again. By the end of 2013, dozens of people in Kalachi had experienced the same thing. They would suddenly fall asleep in the middle of the day, some while walking, others while driving or even talking. There was no warning, no common pattern. They couldn't be woken up, not by shaking, cold water, or even pain. They would sleep for 2, 3, sometimes 5 days straight, and when they finally opened their eyes, they had no memory of what had happened. Some suffered hallucinations or partial paralysis. Others spoke of dreams that felt endless, or of waking with intense anxiety. In rare cases, children became aggressive after waking, shouting, crying, confused by their surroundings. The villagers began to whisper, "It's the air, the ground, the wind is poisoned," and maybe they were right. Kalachi wasn't alone. Just 600 meters away sat the remains of another village, Krasnogorsk. Once a thriving mining town, it had been abandoned years earlier, but it still held a secret. Uranium Mine Number 8, a Soviet-era facility, long closed, now filled with water, forgotten by the world. To the villagers, the cause was obvious. It had to be the mine. Something leaking into the soil, or the air, or the water. Something radioactive, something dangerous. But government investigators weren't so sure. Over the next 2 years, Kalachi became a case study in mystery. More than 150 people, nearly a quarter of the town's population, had fallen victim to the syndrome, some more than once. Medical teams tested everything: blood samples, air quality, soil content, carbon monoxide levels. They looked for fungal spores, environmental toxins, even biological weapons. Nothing fit. Radiation levels were normal. The water supply was clean. No pathogens were detected. Doctors were baffled. In 2015, the government offered a solution: relocate the entire town. Residents were given money to leave. Some accepted, others refused. Kalachi had been their home for generations. They didn't want to abandon it, not to rumors and not to sleep. But the sleeping didn't stop. One man fell asleep 7 times. Another woman dozed off in the middle of a phone call, and woke up 4 days later. Even cats and dogs were found lying in the streets, unmoving, as if sedated. It was like the entire village had been cursed, like a real-life Sleeping Beauty, only with no prince, no spell, and no end. Then, in mid-2015, researchers from Nazarbayev University released a new theory. They believed that the cause was carbon monoxide and hydrocarbon gases leaking from the nearby uranium mines. The old shafts had filled with water, pushing gases up through the soil, occasionally and unpredictably. The gases would enter homes, sometimes in small doses, sometimes stronger. The symptoms, loss of consciousness, hallucinations, slow heart rate, all matched carbon monoxide poisoning. It made sense. But not everyone was convinced. Why had the syndrome only begun recently, when the mine had been abandoned for decades? Why did it only affect certain homes and not others right next door? And if it literally was gas, why weren't more animals dying? The truth was, even with data, no one could say for sure. By the end of 2016, most of the town had relocated. Kalachi became quiet again, houses boarded up, streets empty. The sleeping episodes became rarer and then stopped. Today, only a handful of people still live there. They grow potatoes, drink tea, and keep their windows open at night, just in case. The syndrome has never returned, at least not officially, but the mystery remains. Was it gas? Was it psychological? Or was it something stranger? Something hidden in the soil, or the air, or the silence? Kalachi was once a village like any other. Then it became the town that couldn't wake up. A place where sleep came like a shadow, quiet, uninvited, and impossible to resist. Some believe the answers lie deep beneath the ground. Others think they were never meant to be found. And as the wind blows across the empty roads of Kalachi, past broken fences and locked doors, it carries with it the question that science still cannot answer. Why did they sleep? And what would have happened if they never woke up? Circleville, Ohio. A small American town of barely 14,000 people, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where secrets don't stay secret for long. But in the summer of 1976, a new kind of fear crept into Circleville, quiet, personal, and handwritten. It began with a single envelope, plain, no return address, postmarked from Columbus, about 30 miles away. Inside, a single page scrawled in large, blocky letters. It accused Mary Gillespie, a local school bus driver, of having an affair with the school superintendent. It warned her to end the relationship immediately or face exposure. Mary was confused. She had never told anyone. Was it a prank, a jealous neighbor? She kept the letter to herself. Then another came, and another, each one more aggressive, more detailed, and then her husband received one too. Ron Gillespie was a quiet, hard-working man. The letter he received wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. It said if he didn't stop his wife's supposed affair, he would die. It wasn't a joke anymore. Mary and Ron, now both shaken, told a few family members. They tried to figure out who was behind the letters. They even suspected someone they knew, someone close. They wrote a letter of their own, accusing the person they suspected, and told them to stop. For a brief moment, the letters ceased, but it didn't last. On August 19, 1977, Ron received a phone call. The voice on the line told him they were watching his house, and they knew what he had done. Ron grabbed his gun and drove off in his pickup truck. He told no one where he was going. Moments later, he was dead. His truck had veered off the road and crashed into a tree. The crash seemed odd, no skid marks, no sign of braking. His blood alcohol level was well over the legal limit, which his family found unbelievable. He rarely drank, certainly not enough to lose control of a vehicle. Even stranger, the gun he took with him had been fired once, but no shell casing, no bullet, no target was ever found. Ron Gillespie's death was ruled an accident, but those who knew him, and those who knew the letters, weren't so sure. After Ron's death, the letter writer grew bolder. More residents in Circleville began receiving letters. Some were warned about alleged affairs. Others were accused of embezzlement or child abuse. One school official received multiple letters claiming he was hiding dark secrets. The letters had something in common. They always included personal information, details no outsider could have known. The tone was sharp, almost righteous. as if the writer believed they were delivering justice. The town was growing paranoid. No one knew who to trust. Then, in 1983, something terrifying happened. While driving her bus route, Mary Gillespie saw a crude sign nailed to a post, one accusing her of killing her husband. She stopped the bus, got out. She walked toward the sign. Behind it was a small box, secured with twine and partially buried in the grass. Inside was a .25 caliber pistol, rigged with string and wood, a booby trap designed to fire the weapon when the sign was removed. It was a clear attempt on Mary's life. But this time, they had evidence. Police examined the gun. Its serial number had been scratched off, but not completely. They traced it back to Paul Freshour, Mary's former brother-in-law. Paul had been one of the people trying to help Mary identify the writer years earlier. Now, suddenly, he was the prime suspect. Paul insisted he was innocent. He admitted the gun had once been his, but claimed it had gone missing months before. He said he had no knowledge of the trap. He offered to take a polygraph. He failed. On the strength of that evidence and his alleged motive, Paul was arrested and charged with attempted murder. He was convicted and sent to prison. The town breathed a sigh of relief. The letter writer had been caught. Or so they thought, because even while Paul Freshour was locked away in a maximum security prison, the letters kept coming. They were still postmarked from Columbus, still written in the same blocky handwriting, still filled with threats, accusations, and dark knowledge. Paul had no access to paper, no stamps, no envelopes. He was placed in solitary confinement. His mail was monitored, his cell was searched, and still, somehow, the letters appeared. Even the prison warden admitted, there's no way these letters could be coming from him. Some of the new letters were taunting. They mocked the police, mocked Paul. One simply read, "You've treated me wrong, so I've treated you wrong. If you come to chase me, I'll come to kill you." The tone had changed. The writer wasn't just exposing secrets anymore. They were gloating. Paul served 10 years and was released in 1994. He continued to proclaim his innocence for the rest of his life. He cooperated with journalists, appeared on Unsolved Mysteries, and passed another polygraph test years later. The show even received its own letter after airing Paul's story. It read, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. Do nothing to hurt Sheriff Radcliffe. If you come to Ohio, you El Sicko will pay." It was unsigned, but the message was clear. To this day, no one knows who wrote the Circleville letters. More than 1,000 letters were mailed over a span of 2 decades. Some were crude, some were eloquent, some destroyed lives, others may have told the truth. Were they the work of a single person, or several? Was it a campaign for justice, or manipulation disguised as morality? The people of Circleville still don't know, and the writer was never caught. Only the letters remain, faded, yellowed, filed away in plastic evidence sleeves. But every one of them is laced with fear. Fear of what people were hiding, fear of who was watching, and fear of what happens when the one watching never stops. In a quiet room of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, behind glass and soft lighting, lies a curious piece of parchment. It's old, frayed, drawn on the skin of a gazelle. The ink has faded, the edges are torn, and yet, what it shows is enough to keep historians awake at night. Because this isn't just any map, it's a chart of the known world, drawn in the year 1513, before much of the world was known. It's called the Piri Reis Map, and no one can quite explain how it exists. The map was created by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, a sailor, navigator, and scholar. He had spent years at sea and longer still collecting maps from every ship, port, and traveler he could find. In his own handwritten notes, inked in the margins of the parchment, Piri claims that his map was compiled using over 20 earlier charts, including some drawn by the Portuguese, some by Arab sailors, and at least one by none other than Christopher Columbus himself. Only 1/3 of the map survives today. But that fragment is astonishing. It shows the west coast of Africa, the east coast of South America, and the northern edge of Antarctica, drawn centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered. And here's the eerie part. The Antarctic coast is drawn as if it were free of ice. According to mainstream science, Antarctica has been buried beneath ice for thousands of years. Its true coastline is hidden beneath massive glaciers, visible only with modern radar and satellite technology. So how did Piri Reis, or whoever created the source maps he used, know what it looked like? That's the question that has haunted researchers for decades. The map first came to modern attention in 1929 when it was rediscovered during renovations at the Topkapi Palace Library. Scholars were amazed by its level of detail and its accuracy, especially considering it was drawn just 21 years after Columbus's first voyage. The Americas were still largely unexplored. Antarctica hadn't been discovered at all. And yet here was a map showing land masses, coastal outlines, and even inland rivers, all drawn with surprising precision. Some of the curves on the map align uncannily well with modern satellite imagery of Antarctica's subglacial terrain, a version of the continent that's not visible to the naked eye. It was enough to launch dozens of theories. One theory suggests that Piri Reis had access to ancient charts created by a lost civilization, perhaps seafarers from thousands of years earlier, who mapped the world in a forgotten age. Atlantean myths, ancient mariners, or pre-Ice Age explorers, the speculation runs wild. Others believe it's proof that early explorers like the Phoenicians or Chinese may have circumnavigated the globe long before Columbus, and that their charts were copied and recopied, passing secretly through the centuries until they reached the hands of Piri Reis. Skeptics, of course, offer other explanations. They argue that the Antarctic section of the map could simply be a distorted drawing of South America, stretched and misaligned due to copying errors or lack of precise measurement tools. They point to inconsistencies, missing features, and artistic embellishments. After all, even the most accurate maps of the 16th century were filled with sea monsters and mythical lands. But still, the match is close. Uncomfortably close. Piri Reis himself never claimed to understand all of it. He was simply compiling what others had drawn. In his notes he writes, "This map has been drawn with information from 20 charts and mappe mundi, some drawn in the time of Alexander, some from the Arabs, some from the Portuguese, and one from Colombo." He never says where those older maps came from, he only hints at their power. Today, the surviving portion of the Piri Reis map is just that, a portion. The rest has been lost to time. We don't know what was on the missing sections. Some believe they showed the rest of the world, Europe, Asia, even the Pacific. If they still exist, no one has seen them. If they're gone, then the full picture may never be known. But what remains is enough. Enough to ask the question, what if history is incomplete? What if the world was mapped long before we thought it was? And what if that knowledge, that ancient knowledge, was buried, copied, lost, and then rediscovered by accident? In a world of GPS and satellites, it's hard to imagine a time when the edges of the Earth were unknown, when maps were stitched together from rumor and starlight, and when distant continents were nothing more than whispers. But the Piri Reis map reminds us that maybe some people knew more than they should have, and maybe some of that knowledge never truly disappeared. It just waited, on gazelle skin, in a library drawer, in the dust, for someone to look closer and wonder. And that brings us to the end of this 2-hour deep dive into some of the most haunting unsolved mysteries out there. Putting this video together took a lot of time, research, and late nights, so if you enjoyed the journey, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and left a like. It helps the channel grow and lets me keep making more content like this. Thanks for watching.